Day 4. That's when it happened. Not day 1, when the grid went down and everyone was still telling themselves it would be fixed by morning. Not day 2, when the grocery store parking lot turned into something between a tailgate party and a slow-burning argument about the last case of water. Day 4. That's when a man we'll call Marcus heard knocking at his neighbor's door that didn't sound like a neighbor. 3 men, standing there with the specific patience of people who already know what they're about to find. One of them spoke quietly, almost politely. "We heard you folks were doing all right over here." Not a question, an arrival. The family was doing all right because Marcus had told people they were doing all right. Not with those words, not intentionally. Day 2, he'd walked over with a flashlight, mentioned his generator was holding, said he wasn't too worried. Day 3, different neighbor, same performance. He was being decent. He was being human. And by day 4, that information had traveled far beyond anyone he'd spoken to directly. He hadn't said a single word to those 3 men. He didn't need to. And that's exactly how a good neighbor becomes a target. This is what nobody tells you. It's not the unprepared people who get targeted first in a collapse scenario. It's the visibly prepared ones. Because the moment you look like you have something worth taking, you stop being a neighbor and start being a destination. And the gray man protocol exists for exactly one reason: to make sure you are never, under any circumstances, a destination. Let's define this precisely, because most survival content gets it wrong from the first sentence. The gray man protocol is not about clothing color. It is not about being quiet or keeping to yourself. It is a comprehensive, systematic approach to social invisibility, built on the same principles of behavioral camouflage and environmental integration used by special operations personnel moving through populated areas without registering as threats or targets. The difference is they apply it in foreign countries, surrounded by people who speak different languages and follow different customs. You have to apply it in your own neighborhood, around people who already know your face and your car and which lights you leave on at night. That is genuinely harder. And it starts with something most people have never thought about deliberately in their lives. But clothing and gear are the easy part. The hard part is what comes out of your mouth. We'll get there. First, baseline behavior, because without understanding this, nothing else in this protocol lands correctly. Every street has a baseline on day 1 of a crisis. Anxious waiting, people on porches, dead phones in their hands, forced conversations with neighbors they've ignored for years. That's the rhythm of a neighborhood that hasn't yet accepted what's happening. Your job is to match that rhythm so perfectly that you disappear inside it. Not calm, not quiet, accurate. Because in a sea of scared people, the calmest man in the room becomes a lighthouse, visible from every direction, impossible to ignore. The gray man is not a lighthouse. He is the water. He doesn't fight the current. He becomes part of it. He mirrors the anxiety just enough, performs the uncertainty just convincingly enough that he produces zero friction in the social environment around him. This sounds simple. It is genuinely difficult. Because the next mistake, the one that gets prepared people targeted more than any gear failure or tactical error, happens almost automatically. Veterans call it the operator tell, and if you spent serious time training or preparing for exactly this kind of scenario, you already have one, and you probably don't know it. The moment a real crisis arrives and your mind shifts into operational mode, your body follows without asking permission. Posture moves forward slightly. Eyes start scanning wider and lower, running pattern recognition on the environment in ways that look nothing like a stressed civilian looking around. Movement becomes efficient in a specific way. Fewer wasted steps, deliberate transitions, an absence of the small human inefficiencies that characterize someone genuinely improvising. To you, it feels like focus. To the wrong person watching, it screams, "This guy is different." And in a collapse environment, different gets remembered first, different gets discussed, different gets visited on day 4. The people who notice this tell fastest are rarely the ones you'd expect. Not the prepared neighbor with the visible rifle on his porch. It's the adaptive opportunist, the one who has been quietly reading rooms for survival reasons that predate any collapse scenario entirely. He's been assessing your block since day 1. He has a mental model of everyone on it already. He will clock your operator tel before you've completed your first quiet sweep of the perimeter, and he will file your address under a very different category than everyone else. The correction is behavioral suppression, deliberate, practiced, and maintained throughout every interaction. You slow your pace to match the crowd. You introduce small, performed inefficiencies, a pause to look at something you don't care about, a phone check with the expression of someone hoping for better news, a brief conversation with a neighbor you didn't need to have, but that anchors you socially as a normal, stressed person, rather than a man running a quiet operation. These are not accidents. They are calculated noise injected into your behavioral signal. A radar system tracks a target moving in a straight line at constant speed very easily. Irregular patterns, inconsistent pace, unremarkable social anchors. These make you background clutter. That's exactly where you need to be. Now, gear and clothing. These matter, but not for the reasons most survival channels focus on. Tactical boots in your neighborhood during a collapse are basically a flashing sign that says, "I have training and I have supplies." Leave them in the closet. Wear work boots or trail runners that give you identical functional performance, real ankle support, real grip, real durability in rough conditions, without the advertisement. A merino wool base layer under a plain, slightly worn civilian overshirt gives you thermal regulation and layering capability without a single visual cue that you've ever read a field manual. Neutral tones, not because beige is magical, but because the human brain anchors memory to contrast. It remembers the orange jacket. It remembers the vest with 17 external pockets. What it forgets almost immediately is the person in muted, unremarkable colors that moved through the frame without snagging a single thread of anyone's attention. Your gear travels in containers that match the environment's expectations and nothing more. Same supplies, two different bags. One says, "I'm ready for this." The other says, "I went to Costco like everyone else." The bag is doing more work than the contents. A worn canvas backpack, a thrifted duffel with a broken zipper pull, a cooler that could plausibly contain beer or sodas or leftover food before everything changed. Your vehicle follows exactly the same logic, statistically common for your area. No aftermarket modifications, no roof rack, no antenna, no sticker that tells anyone anything about your politics or your hobbies or your preparedness philosophy. Enough accumulated ordinariness to register as furniture rather than as a statement. Now, the hard part, the part nobody wants to say directly. The Gray Man Protocol applies to your conversations, specifically to what you allow people to understand about your level of preparation, because in a community under stress, information about who has resources travels faster than almost anything else, and it travels almost entirely through well-meaning people who have no idea they're drawing a map with your house at the center of it. Your neighbor who mentions to someone that you always seem prepared, she's not betraying you, she genuinely likes you. She's making conversation in a stressful moment and reaching for something reassuring to say. But she has just placed your name and your address inside a social network you cannot see, cannot audit, and cannot erase. The information is out, and unlike the power grid, it does not come back when conditions improve. So, in conversations during the first 72 hours, you perform calibrated ordinariness. You let yourself appear slightly uncertain about things you know precisely. When someone expresses worry about food, the Gray Man doesn't say, "I've got 3 months covered." He says, "Yeah, I grabbed some extra canned goods last week. Honestly, not sure how far it stretches." You've sounded human, you've sounded relatable, and mildly stressed. You've shared a version of the truth that reveals nothing operationally significant. This is not dishonesty. This is information security applied to conversation. The same principle that governs why you don't tell strangers where you keep your valuables, why you don't announce to the room that you're leaving for 2 weeks vacation. The information has consequences. You control what you release. The harder version involves people you genuinely like. The Gray Man Protocol doesn't tell you to isolate from your community or to treat everyone around you as a threat. It tells you to be surgically deliberate about who gets what information at what stage of the degradation curve. What you said openly in week 1 will be circulating through networks you never intended to reach by week 2. Every share is permanent. Information released cannot be recalled. That discipline, applied quietly and consistently from day one, is what keeps your name off the map. By week 2, the environment has restructured completely. Anxious waiting has become real scarcity, real calculation, real social repositioning. People who weren't thinking strategically in the first days are now thinking very strategically indeed. And this is where I need you to picture something specific, because this is the kind of thing that happens quietly and then suddenly. It's night 9. Your block is mostly dark. You're in your kitchen, light low, window covered. You're cooking. Nothing elaborate, just something warm. 2 streets over, a woman is lying awake because her family hasn't had a hot meal in 4 days. Her window is open because the night is warm, and she can smell it. Not strongly, just enough to know. She doesn't hate you, she doesn't want anything bad for you, but she mentions it to her husband. Her husband mentions it to the man across the alley. By day 11, there's a soft but very real consensus forming on your block about which house still has food. You said nothing. Your kitchen said everything. Cooking smells in a food-scarce environment are a genuine security variable, not a small detail. Low-temperature cooking, ingredients with minimal aromatic profile, timing meals to coincide with periods of lower neighborhood activity, these are sensory camouflage applied directly to your home's signature. Light discipline matters for the same reason. Not just the light itself, but the behavioral silhouette it projects through curtains, the moving shadows that tell an observer outside exactly how many people are in a room and roughly where they're positioned at any given moment. Blackout curtains eliminate the silhouette entirely. They turn your windows from intelligent sources into blank, unreadable surfaces. Movement in this phase drops to essential only, on variable timing, through variable routes, during the edges of the day. The same time every morning is a schedule someone else can plan around. The same route every evening is a path someone can intercept or simply observe long enough to learn from. Dawn and late evening aren't just useful because of reduced visibility. They're biologically optimal because human alertness follows a hormonal rhythm. Peak cortisol and peak vigilance occur in mid-morning and mid-afternoon. The edges of the day are when collective human attention is at its natural low. Chronobiology applied to operational security. It functions identically on your suburban street as it does in any contested environment anywhere in the world. Total avoidance, though, is also a pattern. Never leaving your house eventually becomes as noticeable as leaving it every single day on a predictable schedule. The goal isn't to vanish completely from the social environment. The goal is to become human background noise, the car that's always been parked on that street. Nobody tracks it. Nobody wonders when it arrived or who owns it. Nobody thinks about it at all. It's just there. That is a target state. Consistent, unremarkable, unworthy of a second thought. And here's a part almost no survival channel will tell you honestly, because it's uncomfortable as hell to acknowledge. The Gray Man Protocol is not a permanent identity. It's a phase, a window of elevated social risk with a defined beginning and the necessary end. Because the same invisibility that protects you in weeks 1 and 2 becomes a real liability in week 4, when the community building phase begins in earnest. When the people who've been cooperating and sharing and organizing slowly solidify into the actual survival infrastructure of the neighborhood, the trust networks that control resource access, mutual protection, and collective decision-making, the person who was strategically invisible during the crisis might find themselves outside those networks entirely. The protocol that saved you in week 1 can isolate you in week 4 if you don't know when to step out of it deliberately. The gray man who makes it through the full arc of a serious collapse scenario is the one who treated invisibility as a tool, not a destination, who used the protected time not just to stay safe, but to observe carefully, to identify the specific people whose cooperation would matter in the weeks ahead, to build a small number of deliberate and genuine relationships rather than broadcasting his status to everyone or hiding completely from everyone. He was never the most visible person on the block. He was also never completely off the social map. He existed at exactly the level of visibility each moment required, and he adjusted that level as each moment changed. Every element of this protocol, the behavioral suppression, the container discipline, the information management, the movement timing, the home camouflage, exists to protect one thing. Not your supplies, not your tactical position, your ability to think.
Cognitive space, the capacity to reason clearly and act from deliberate choice in an environment specifically engineered by its chaos to make you reactive, emotional, and short-sighted. The gray man is not invisible because he's afraid. He's invisible because he's still thinking. And in a collapsing neighborhood, the person who's genuinely still thinking, not reacting, not performing, not broadcasting, is the most capable person on the block regardless of what they're wearing. Marcus failed because he lacked supplies. He was the most prepared man on his street. He failed because he was visible before the environment demanded invisibility. In a real collapse, what you reveal about yourself can cost you more than what you own. Sometimes that's the whole difference between week 1 and week 4. Learn the baseline, match it perfectly, control your signal, protect your mind. And when the world is screaming, be the one man nobody can find.